It started with a flicker of sunlight, a flash of reflection captured mid-flight by a drone soaring over the endless, scorched spine of the Mojave. Miguel Calderon, a part-time wildlife videographer and weekend drone hobbyist, had flown out past the usual range, chasing wild bighorn sheep through an unmarked valley east of Kelso Depot. What his drone saw next, however, wasn't wildlife. It wasn't natural. The footage, uploaded late that night, was titled simply, "WTF is this? Mojave Desert Find, Raw Drone Clip." At first glance it looked like nothing, just rocks, dry scrub brush, and the skeletal geometry of heat-hardened terrain. But 1 minute and 43 seconds in, as the drone banked left over a narrow wash, something caught the lens. Twisted metal, half-buried, rusted, and sun-bleached. Near it, two long, pale shapes, human shapes, and something else. A pattern in the sand, too perfect to be natural. A spiral, carved with deliberate intent, etched into the desert floor. The video went viral overnight. Within hours, digital sleuths began analyzing the frames, enhancing images, triangulating coordinates. Someone zoomed in on a barely visible license plate fragment. California tags, 2003. Another user recognized the make of the rusted vehicle, an early 2000s Jeep Cherokee. Someone else pulled up a missing persons poster that had circulated briefly 2 decades ago. A man and his son, Daniel and Ethan Holloway, vanished in July 2003. No trace, no closure, just gone. Until now. Authorities responded quickly. The footage was flagged and eventually pulled down, but not before it had been downloaded, mirrored, and reposted across the internet. A team from the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office arrived at the location within 48 hours, guided by drone coordinates and satellite overlays. What they found confirmed everyone's worst suspicions and triggered questions no one was prepared to answer. A rusted-out Jeep, human remains, and a site that made seasoned investigators stop cold. The bones weren't scattered, they were placed, arranged, as if someone, or something, had been trying to tell a story or leave a warning, one that had waited in silence for 20 years. It was supposed to be one last summer escape before middle school started, a simple trip to reconnect. In July of 2003, Daniel Holloway, 42, packed up his Jeep Cherokee, filled a cooler with water, snacks, and freeze-dried meals, and set out with his 12-year-old son, Ethan, into the Mojave Desert. They left behind the quiet suburbs of Temecula with an old map, a camera, and the kind of optimism only a grieving parent would carry. Daniel had lost his wife, Ethan's mother, just 8 months earlier to an undiagnosed heart condition. He hadn't been the same since. Friends said he smiled less, spoke in fragments. But when he talked about the desert, something sparked. "I just want him to see the stars without streetlights," he told his sister before they left. "I want to show him silence." Real silence. They were heading for the Mojave National Preserve, a sprawling, brutal stretch of sun-beaten wilderness dotted with abandoned mines, dry lake beds, and roads that faded into nothing. The plan was to camp for 3 days, hike the Providence Mountains, then loop back through Kelso Dunes. Daniel had even mapped a few lesser-known trails he found on old ranger forums, routes that promised solitude, stargazing, and a break from the noise of grief. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Very wrong. When they failed to return by Monday, Daniel's sister assumed they had extended the trip. By Wednesday, she was calling ranger stations. On Friday, she filed a missing persons report. Search teams launched helicopters and deployed ground units, but the terrain was unforgiving. The desert offers few clues and erases them quickly. No tire tracks, no campsites, no bodies. Just heat and silence. Over the next 2 weeks, the only trace found was a sun-bleached receipt from a gas station in Barstow, time-stamped July 18th, 8:42 a.m. Daniel buying jerky, bottled water, and a paper map. The clerk remembered Ethan, said he seemed quiet, tired, like a kid who didn't want to be there. After that, nothing. No signals, no sightings, no evidence they'd ever even entered the preserve. By August, the case was cold, a father and son lost to the desert, swallowed whole by heat and dust, a mystery left to rot in the sun for 20 years, until a drone captured what the desert had finally decided to give back. Before she died, Marissa Holloway made Daniel promise one thing: take care of Ethan. She said it with a trembling hand in his, her eyes sunken but clear. "He needs you," she whispered. "Don't disappear." That was 8 months before the desert swallowed them both. Daniel Holloway wasn't an adventurer. He was a literature teacher, quiet, deliberate, more comfortable with paperbacks than pocket knives. But after Marissa's funeral, something shifted. He stopped shaving, canceled his fall semester lectures, and started spending long hours staring at topographic maps, his finger tracing ridgelines like they were sentences waiting to be read. Ethan, only 12, had withdrawn in his own way. No more soccer, no more sleepovers. He began sketching strange landscapes in his notebook: caves, dead trees, skies filled with stars, and no moon. When Daniel saw one of the drawings, he put a hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Let's go find it." That's how it began, the idea of one last adventure before the school year, before real life, before the grief calcified. 3 days, Daniel told his sister, brushing off her concern. Some bonding, some breathing room. A quiet place. We need it. He meant it. In his mind, the desert wasn't a threat. It was a reset button, a place where cell phones didn't ring and memories didn't ambush you in grocery store aisles. He bought a used tent, a portable stove, and a pair of sturdy hiking boots. He let Ethan pick out snacks, load the cooler, pack his own gear. They weren't running from anything, Daniel told himself. They were stepping into something clean, something healing. The night before they left, he gave Ethan a small compass, an antique he'd found in a junk shop years earlier. "If you ever feel lost," he said, "this will point you somewhere." The next morning they left Temecula before dawn, the sun rising in the rear view as Daniel drove east. Ethan leaned against the window half asleep, the compass in his hand. It was supposed to be a memory-making trip, one last father-son chapter before school bells and routines. But promises made in the light of grief don't always survive the dark, especially in a place where the horizon never ends, and neither do the shadows. They hit the road on July 18th, 2003, just after 5 a.m. Daniel's Jeep Cherokee hummed down the highway, the cooler sloshing in the back, Ethan's sketchbook balanced on his knees. The boy barely spoke, but he'd brought 3 pencils and a small digital camera, gifted to him by his aunt. He wasn't excited, not really. But there was a quiet sense of acceptance in him, like he understood this trip was something his dad needed more than he did. Their destination was the Mojave National Preserve, a vast, bone-dry expanse of sun, silence, and sky. Over 1.6 million acres of desert where ancient lava flows sleep under sand and forgotten roads stretch like veins toward nowhere. Daniel had printed routes from old forums and ranger logs, highlighted spots most tourists ignored, abandoned mines, rock formations, petroglyph sites off the beaten path. He wanted solitude, yes, but also symbolism, some place where healing could happen without ceremony. They made a quick stop in Barstow for gas, snacks, and a last-minute paper map. The cashier remembered them later, Daniel with his road-weary posture, and Ethan with tired eyes and a grape Gatorade. From there, they entered the preserve just past Kell Baker Road. At first, the trip was everything Daniel had hoped for. They set up camp near Granite Mountains, grilled hot dogs over a small fire, and watched the sky melt into orange and blood-red streaks. That night, Daniel pointed out constellations while Ethan pretended not to care. But the boy still looked, still listened. On day 2, they veered off the main trail. Daniel's notes suggested an old path near Devil's Playground that led to a rock formation known only in local legend, Whisper Ridge. It wasn't on official maps. Supposedly, the wind passed through the rocks there in a way that made voices sound like they were coming from beneath your feet. Daniel thought Ethan would find it cool. He didn't know it would be the last place anyone saw them. No GPS pings, no camera photos, no journal entries past that point. Whatever happened after Whisper Ridge, whatever turned healing into haunting, was left for the desert to bury or keep. At least until the drone found what time and memory had almost forgotten. The last confirmed sighting came from a dusty gas station on the edge of Barstow. Security footage, later pulled by investigators, showed the timestamp, July 18, 2003, 8:42 a.m. The footage was grainy, washed out by sun glare through dirty windows, but the figures were clear enough. Daniel Holloway, gray T-shirt, damp with sweat, carried 2 gallons of water, a stack of printed topographical maps, and a bag of beef jerky. Ethan trailed a few feet behind, dragging his sneakers and clutching a plastic Gatorade bottle, grape-flavored. They didn't speak much, just quiet movements, and the kind of unspoken exhaustion you only see between people bonded by grief. The cashier that day, a college student named Raina, remembered the encounter without needing to check the tape. He asked if we had any maps that showed unmarked trails, she said later. Said he was looking for spots where nobody else goes. She told him most of those weren't safe. The preserve was massive, full of abandoned mining roads, flash flood zones, and places cell service simply didn't exist. Daniel just nodded, said he preferred the quiet. Raina noticed Ethan picking at the corner of a paper map, eyes fixed on a scribbled area labeled Devil's Playground. She tried to make conversation, asked if he was excited for the trip. Ethan didn't answer. When they left, she watched them drive off through the haze, a beat-up green Jeep heading east into the heat, disappearing behind a curtain of dust. A father chasing peace, a son along for the ride. What struck her most, though, wasn't the silence. It was the look Daniel gave her right before stepping out the door. A faint smile, tired and hollow, like a man already halfway gone. No one else would ever report seeing them again, not at the visitor center, not at any campsite, not on satellite imagery or ranger logs. From that moment forward, the Holloways became ghosts, slipping into a stretch of wilderness that has a long memory and an even longer silence. It was supposed to be 3 days, back by Monday. Burgers on the grill at Daniel's sister's house, Ethan's cousins in the pool, cold drinks on the patio, an early summer send-off before school, and routines returned. But Monday came and went. No call. No show. At first, it didn't spark panic. Daniel had mentioned wanting to unplug, to get off the grid. Maybe they stayed an extra day. Maybe they'd lost track of time. Tuesday evening, she called his cell. Straight to voicemail. Wednesday morning, she tried again. Still, nothing. That's when the worry started to settle in, slow and cold. By Thursday, she drove to Daniel's place, mail stacked up, trash untouched, Ethan's dog whining behind the front door. She called the ranger station at Mojave. They had no record of a vehicle entry, no permits. No one by that name had signed in at the visitor center. It was like they'd never entered the preserve at all. But the gas station footage proved otherwise. Something had happened between the road and wherever they were headed. On Friday, she filed a missing persons report. The responding officer was polite but unconcerned. "Could just be camping longer than planned," he said. "We get these all the time." But by Saturday, search and rescue was called. Helicopters took off at dawn. Search teams deployed across known trails. ATVs combed fire roads. Spotters scanned from the air. Nothing. No vehicle. No debris. No signs of a fire or shelter. Just heat ripples and silence. Daniel's sister gave them a copy of his hand-drawn route plan. One ranger looked at it and winced. "That's not a trail," he said. "That's a drainage wash." Search dogs were brought in. They found nothing. No scent trail. No evidence anyone had walked that path in days, maybe weeks. The Jeep's license plate was entered into the national database. No hits, no tows, no border crossings. By the end of week 2, it was officially cold. The desert had taken them. No ransom, no distress signal. Just a father and son gone like smoke. Some said it was dehydration. Others said disorientation. But Daniel's sister never believed that. He would have died trying to carry Ethan out, she said, unless something stopped him first. The official search started at dawn on July 26th. The sun was already punishing by 7 a.m., rising like a silent warning above the jagged silhouette of the Providence Mountains. 2 helicopters lifted off from Baker Airport, scanning the wide emptiness of the Mojave National Preserve while rangers on ATVs fanned out along known paths, hoping to catch sight of tire tracks, a signal flare, anything. But the desert offered nothing. No vehicle, no footprints, no discarded gear, just an endless sprawl of sandstone, sagebrush, and sun-baked silence. The first day yielded nothing. So did the second. On the third, volunteer searchers arrived, seasoned hikers, SAR vets, even a retired military tracker. They started gridding the landscape, plotting coordinates, sweeping canyon floors and rocky outcrops. Still, nothing. Every lead dissolved under the weight of the sun. Satellite imagery was pulled, high-resolution scans from the week after Daniel and Ethan had disappeared. No visible sign of a vehicle, no tents, not even a campfire ring. Rangers began to question if the Jeep had ever made it into the preserve, but then came the gas station footage and Daniel's annotated map. And one more clue, a digital timestamp from a weather monitoring station deep inside the park. A Jeep-like vehicle had passed the infrared sensor at 9:21 a.m. on July 18th, triggering a temperature spike. That was the last digital trace. After that, silence. The terrain around the signal zone was brutal. Cracked earth, loose rock, steep gullies where the wind never stopped howling. The helicopters did second and third passes. One pilot said it was like searching for a dropped coin in a gravel pit. The heat complicated everything, melted rubber, erased tracks. By day 7, most of the rangers already knew what they weren't saying out loud. The Holloways weren't just missing. They were gone, swallowed. The lead ranger submitted a report. No signs of distress, no evidence of foul play. Desert conditions likely fatal within 48 to 72 hours. It read like closure. But Daniel's sister refused to sign anything. They're still out there, she said. They're just not where you're looking. No one knew then how right she might be, or how far from the truth that report would turn out to be. Out here, the wind talks. Locals say it whistles warnings through canyons, carries voices across miles of rock and ruin. You just have to listen. When word spread that a father and son had vanished in the preserve, the official response was science, coordinates, elevations, maps. But around the dusty bars and old RV parks on the preserve's outskirts, the talk sounded different. It wasn't maps. It was stories. Ghost towns that didn't appear on GPS, dead mines where radios cut out, places where compasses spun like tops and shadows fell in the wrong direction. The Mojave, they said, doesn't just get hot, it gets strange. One prospector, a leathery old man named Buck with a missing tooth and a face like sun-dried leather, said he'd seen lights out near Devil's Playground. Not headlights, he told a ranger once, low, close to the ground, like they were crawling. Nobody took him seriously. Not at first. Another woman, a third-generation homesteader who lived near Goffs, said her grandfather warned against venturing near Whisper Ridge, especially in July. The sun doesn't move right out there, she said, and the rocks remember things. She wouldn't explain what that meant, but it stuck with the search teams, especially those who came back feeling uneasy for reasons they couldn't explain. The desert has legends. It always has. The lost ship of the Colorado, the Mojave megaphone, petroglyphs that don't match any known tribe. But one story kept resurfacing in whispers, the tale of a stretch of land past the Kelso Dunes where people go to vanish, a place where old miners sealed something in, not out. "It doesn't give things back," Buck said one night at a roadside bar, sipping warm whiskey with shaking hands. "That desert, it remembers you, and it waits." A few rangers dismissed it as superstition, heat-stroke talk, but others, the ones who'd searched long enough to feel the silence pressing down on their chest, didn't laugh. Some started carrying extra batteries, some stopped volunteering altogether, and one ranger, weeks after the Holloway case was officially filed away, left a single sticky note on his locker before transferring out. "We were looking in the wrong direction." No one ever asked what he meant. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just her name and street written in shaky block letters, postmarked from Baker, California, a town Daniel and Ethan had never mentioned visiting. Inside was a single page, torn cleanly from a spiral notebook. On one side, a sketch in pencil and charcoal. On the other, nothing. No note, no signature, no explanation. Daniel's sister didn't need one. She knew Ethan's drawing style, tight line work, no smudges, always with something slightly off, like a dream remembered too late. But this one was different. Rushed. Raw. It showed a cave entrance at the base of a jagged rock formation. Overhead stars dotted the sky, but no moon. In the foreground, a shadowed figure holding something in his hand. A compass. The man had no face, only a smooth oval where features should have been, except for the eyes. Two glowing white circles, wide and inhuman. They didn't belong on the page. They didn't belong anywhere. The drawing was dated in the corner, July 20th, 2003, 2 days after Daniel and Ethan vanished. There were no fingerprints on the envelope, no traceable fibers. Rangers dismissed it as a prank. Said it could have been drawn by anyone who saw the missing poster. Daniel's sister disagreed. "That's Ethan's shading," she said. "He used to press too hard on the left side when he was nervous." She kept the sketch in a sealed plastic sleeve, away from the sun. Years later, when she showed it to a retired profiler, he studied it silently for nearly 5 minutes before asking, "Do you know what this resembles?" She didn't. "There's an old native symbol," he said, flipping through a field guide, used to warn travelers of spirit caves. "Places where the barrier between worlds is thin." He tapped the shadowy figure. "That's not a person," he said. "That's something pretending to be one." The drawing never made it into the official case file. It was too strange, too speculative. But for Daniel's sister, it was proof. Not just that Ethan had survived past the first day, but that he'd seen something out there. Something watching, something waiting. And if he'd had time to draw it, then maybe, just maybe, he'd had time to escape it too. By late September 2003, the hope had dried up, just like everything else in the Mojave. 60 days, over 200 volunteers, 3 helicopters, dozens of trained dogs, not a single piece of clothing, no tire marks, no bones, not even a dropped water bottle. Just heat and silence and the unblinking eyes of desert stone. On October 1st, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office issued a final statement. "Search operations for Daniel and Ethan Holloway are officially concluded. No evidence of foul play or survivability. Translated, they're gone and they're not coming back." The file was moved to cold case status and shelved in a locked cabinet with dozens of others. Missing hikers, solo campers, lost tourists. But this one felt different, not because of who they were, but because of what they weren't. There was no panic, no signal, no sign of struggle. Daniel Holloway had disappeared like he'd meant to. Ethan, too. That's what made people uncomfortable, as if a man could simply will himself out of existence and take his son with him. The media didn't stick around. A few local segments aired on missing persons awareness nights, a short spot on a true crime show. But without photos of bodies or a concrete lead, the public lost interest. Other tragedies took their place, other names, other faces. But Daniel's sister never let it go. She kept calling rangers, kept visiting the preserve. She started mapping the area herself, noting off-grid spots, marking areas missed in the official search. She became a quiet, obsessed figure in missing persons forums, posting every few months, each time with less hope and more urgency. On the 10-year anniversary, she stood alone in a dry wash with a candle and a compass. The flame wouldn't light, the wind wouldn't stop. That night she wrote in her journal, "I don't think the desert took them. I think it kept them. And it's not finished yet. Most people would have stopped looking after 60 days. But the desert doesn't keep secrets forever. It just waits." And 20 years later, when the drone footage surfaced, the search began again. Only this time, what they found wasn't just tragic, it was terrifying. When the facts stop adding up, the stories begin. And in the vacuum left by Daniel and Ethan Holloway's disappearance, stories multiplied like desert shadows at dusk. Some were simple, tragic tales of getting lost, heat stroke, dehydration, the usual grim math of wilderness survival. But others wandered further from the map. The first wave came from internet forums. Armchair detectives pored over old news clippings and search logs, connecting dots that maybe weren't meant to be connected. One thread claimed Daniel had ties to fringe spiritualist groups, something about dream journaling and desert resonance. Another suggested he'd been researching ley lines, ancient paths of energy that supposedly converged near the preserve. No proof, just whispers. Then came the cult theories. A post on Reddit's r/unresolved mysteries pointed to a string of missing persons cases near the same region, couples, loners, even a trio of college students last seen filming a short documentary near Sema Dome. No bodies, no wreckage, just gone. The theory claimed there was a group living off-grid in the Mojave, reclusive, isolated, religious or ritualistic, no one was sure. But their supposed territory overlapped Daniel's last known location. Someone even claimed to find a burned offering site deep in the preserve, animal bones, a ring of stones, symbols etched into the sand. The photos were blurry. The account disappeared the next day. But the theory stuck. Others went darker. They said Daniel had snapped, that the grief of losing his wife broke something in him, that he'd taken Ethan into the desert not to heal, but to disappear, or worse. One post laid out a timeline suggesting Daniel had emptied his savings, sold a collection of rare books, and made several untraceable cash withdrawals in the months leading up to the trip. That much was true. But was it planning or unraveling? Nobody could say. The wildest theory came from a caller to a late-night paranormal podcast. He claimed to be a former ranger who'd quit after seeing something near Whisper Ridge, something with too many legs and no face. He said Daniel hadn't disappeared. He'd been taken. "The Mojave doesn't erase people," the caller said. "It replaces them." The host laughed it off, but the phone line went dead right after. The call was never traced. The theories kept coming. The truth stayed quiet, like the desert itself. Of all the theories that surfaced, one refused to die. It didn't rely on monsters, cults, or shadow people. It was quieter, more methodical, and to some, far more chilling. They called it the bunker theory. It started with a map, an old declassified Cold War document showing rumored fallout shelter locations across the western U.S., government-constructed bunkers, some no bigger than a trailer, meant to house VIPs or sensitive materials in the event of nuclear war. One of the marked sites sat within the Mojave Preserve, coordinates only a few miles from Daniel's last known path. The shelter had never been found. But then came a photo, uploaded anonymously, taken in 2001, showing what looked like a rusted hatch buried in the sand near a dried-out creek bed. There were no signs, no fencing, just a steel plate with a faded number, 42B, and a reinforced wheel lock bolted shut. The post claimed that 2 hikers had found it, tried to report it, and were told by rangers that it's just an old mining vent. But it didn't match any mining records, and mining vents don't usually have radiation seals. From there, the theory evolved. Some believed Daniel had discovered the location by accident, maybe through his research, or by stumbling onto old documents in the school archives where he taught. Others said he'd been planning for years, that the grief was just the final push, that he'd taken Ethan into the desert not to find peace, but to vanish into a forgotten slice of history, off-grid, off-record, forever. Proponents of the theory pointed to his withdrawal from colleagues, the sale of his rare books, the printed maps, and that single word scribbled in the corner of one sublevel. Some claimed the hatch had been found and sealed again by government officials. Others said it was gone entirely, buried under intentional rockfall. A handful of explorers tried to locate it using drone footage and GPS overlays. None succeeded, but one message appeared in a back-channel Discord. A grainy satellite still, time-stamped August 2003, showing heat bloom activity in an area where nothing should have been. No roads, no settlements, just open desert. And then silence. No follow-up, no confirmation. Just another thread pulled and lost. The bunker theory still circulates, not because it's proven, but because, unlike the others, it almost makes sense. And in a case like this, almost is enough to keep people up at night. 3 years after the search was called off, something happened that no one could explain. It was late August 2006, a heat wave rolling through Riverside County, when Daniel's sister returned home to find her answering machine blinking. One new message. The voice on the recording was buried beneath static, distant, warbled, like it had traveled a long way through something it shouldn't have. But in the middle of the hiss, 2 words came through clearly. A child's voice, unmistakably young. "It's hot." A beat of silence. Then another line, softer, nearly a whisper. "Tell Mom I miss her." Then just static. No goodbye, no click, no number displayed on the caller ID. She played it 5 times before calling the phone company. They traced the timestamp, August 21st, 2:16 a.m. The call had come from a payphone, or what used to be one, in a ghost town called Crystal, Nevada. Population 0. According to the utility record, the line hadn't been in service for over a decade. There was no microphone, no working phone, just a sun-bleached booth on the edge of a crumbling foundation, surrounded by sand and silence. The tech on the call reviewed the data 3 times. "It shouldn't be possible," he finally said. Daniel's sister recorded the voicemail to cassette and mailed copies to law enforcement, the FBI, even paranormal investigators. Most dismissed it as a prank. One detective said it could have been a saved message accidentally replayed due to a system glitch. But there was one problem. Ethan had never left a voicemail, not once, not in his 12 years. He didn't like phones, never used them. And besides, how would a glitch create a message that hadn't existed? She kept the tape in a fireproof box. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she'd play it again just to hear the voice. It didn't sound scared. It didn't cry. It sounded resigned, like someone trapped in heat or memory or something else entirely. A voice out of time, from nowhere, or maybe from somewhere that never stopped watching. The number was never traced again, but the tape still plays. And every time it does, it ends the same way. Static and silence, and the unmistakable hum of wind over sand. It surfaced in the most unlikely place, a pawn shop just off I-40 in Gallup, New Mexico. Wedged between a stack of old John Grisham novels and a pile of DVD box sets, it looked like nothing, just a worn, leather-bound notebook with frayed corners and a cracked spine. But when the shop owner flipped it open, he saw something strange. Names, sketches, compass bearings, pages filled with tightly spaced handwriting, scribbled in ink that had faded under desert light. On the inside cover, property of D. Holloway. A college student working part-time at the shop recognized the name. She'd heard about the Holloway case from her father, who'd once worked as a ranger. She snapped a few photos, posted them to an online cold case forum. Within hours, the comments exploded. By morning, the notebook had been verified as Daniel's. The handwriting matched samples from old-school records. The ink? A brand he'd favored, known only to his sister. What was inside was worse. Page after page detailed the days before the disappearance and the days after. According to the journal, Daniel and Ethan had discovered something not marked on any map. A structure built into the earth. A door of metal half buried in the sand. No markings, no handles. Just a strange warmth that radiated from the ground nearby. At first, Daniel thought it was a storage site, old mining equipment, maybe a Cold War relic. But on the second night, things changed. He wrote about hearing sounds, whispers that weren't wind, shapes watching them from the ridgeline. At one point, Ethan woke him, saying there were faces in the rocks. Daniel dismissed it as imagination, but then came the lights. Low, moving without sound, not flashlights, not cars, something else. The door hums at night, one entry reads. I think it's alive. Another page, more frantic. Something comes up when the sun goes down. I don't know what it wants, but it doesn't want us to leave. The final entry was the most chilling. Just 8 words, scratched into the bottom margin like an afterthought. I shouldn't have brought him out here. There were no more pages. The back of the journal was blank. No explanation how it ended up in New Mexico. No name attached to the sale. Just a mystery in ink. Proof, perhaps, that Daniel hadn't gone crazy. Or worse, that he hadn't been alone. It started with a thumbnail. Daniel and Ethan's faces side by side, faded like old paper, under the title, The Holloway Disappearance, Mojave's Most Chilling Cold Case. The video was posted by Lucid Crimes, a mid-tier true crime YouTuber known for deep dives into unsolved mysteries. His earlier videos had done modest numbers. But something about this one, maybe the music, maybe the pacing, maybe the way he stared into the camera and whispered. They vanished without a single footprint. Hit different. It went viral. Within a week, 2.3 million views, comments in the thousands. The algorithm pushed it everywhere. TikTokers stitched it, Reddit reposted it, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the name Daniel Holloway was trending again. The video traced everything: the camping trip, the last sighting, the voicemail, the theories. It showed Ethan's drawing, played a cleaned-up clip of the 2006 tape. It ended with a question: what do you think happened to them? And that's where things got strange. Because buried in the comment section, beneath the usual arguments and ghost stories, was a single post. I know where the boy is buried. No punctuation, no explanation, no follow-up. The account was anonymous, just a string of numbers, created the day the video dropped. At first, people assumed it was bait, a troll trying to stir up attention, but a user named DesertLine76 replied, asking for proof. Minutes later, the original poster replied with coordinates, latitude, longitude, out in the Mojave, near an area the official search never reached. That reply was deleted within 10 minutes. But not before it was screenshotted. Forums lit up, digital sleuths overlaid the coordinates onto satellite maps, historical terrain scans. What they saw wasn't much, just a dry wash, a canyon slope, a glint of something barely visible under the sun. A user tagged it unnatural symmetry. Speculation exploded. Was it the Jeep? A campsite? A shelter? Most dismissed it. Clickbait. Nothing more. But 14 days later, a drone hobbyist named Miguel Calderon decided to find out for himself. What he captured in a single 12-minute flight would crack open everything the desert had buried. The footage was raw, uneven, but what it revealed was clear. Something metallic, something out of place, and near it, something white, bone white. Miguel Calderon didn't consider himself an investigator. He worked in IT by day, flew drones on weekends, and sometimes posted his footage to a quiet Vimeo channel nobody really watched. But the Holloway story got under his skin. Not just the disappearance, the silence, the way the official search stopped, the way everything just faded. He'd watched the Lucid Crimes video like everyone else. But what caught his attention wasn't the narration. It was the coordinates in the comments. He cross-referenced them against topographic data, heat maps, and historical flight overlays. And something jumped out. The location sat on the edge of a long-forgotten dry wash, land not surveyed since the 1980s. No roads, no trails, no campsites, nothing official. But from a certain angle, at a certain time of day, one glint of metal reflected in a narrow curve of the terrain, too geometric to be natural. Miguel packed his Mavic 3 battery packs and drove out before dawn. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. No cell service out there, no GPS after the turnoff, just old coordinates and an instinct he couldn't shake. By noon, the heat was brutal, 111 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. He launched the drone from a ridge and sent it high, letting the software map the terrain as he manually steered over the wash. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then, at minute 12, the glint returned, clear, mirrored, real. Miguel descended slowly, framing the image. A shape emerged, metal, angular, wrecked, but not destroyed. Not like it had rolled or burned, more like it had been placed, nestled into the sand. Nearby, something pale, smooth. Miguel zoomed in. At first he thought it was stone, but stone doesn't look jointed, stone doesn't have teeth, and just beside it, scattered plastic, faded fabric, and something else entirely, a spiral drawn into the earth. Miguel's breath caught. He brought the drone home, packed it in silence, and drove back to civilization like a man trying not to wake something behind him. That night, he uploaded the footage. No editing, no commentary, just raw discovery. The title was simple: Found Something in the Mojave, Holloway Coordinates. By morning, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. By nightfall, it was gone, taken down by a copyright claim from an unnamed entity. But by then, the damage was done. The desert had spoken. And someone, somewhere, wanted it quiet again. Miguel didn't want attention. He posted the GPS coordinates quietly, buried in the description of a reposted clip. Hosted this time on a lesser-known archive site with no algorithm, no comment section, no tags. Just the video and a line of numbers. 34.8211 degrees north, 115.7182 degrees west. Within hours, the coordinates were everywhere. Reddit lit up first. Then came Twitter, Discord, Facebook groups. Holloway Jeep found? Posts exploded. Amateur sleuths dropped pins on digital maps, comparing angles from Miguel's flight to terrain overlays. The spiral shape spotted near the wreckage became a symbol, part mystery, part invitation. By sunrise the next day, people were already en route. Paranormal YouTubers, desert explorers, armchair investigators with GoPros strapped to their chests, and conspiracy podcasts blasting from their dashboards. Some traveled hundreds of miles with nothing but bottled water, flashlights, and digital dreams of going viral. The Mojave, which had kept its silence for 2 decades, was now crawling with the noise of modern curiosity. The first to arrive was a former Marine turned urban explorer. He posted a shaky live stream at 3:17 a.m., showing his GPS ticking closer to the coordinates. Wind howled in the background. His breath was sharp and fast. "I think I see something," he said. The camera swung wildly, landing on a glint of curved metal rising out of the sand like the ribcage of some long, dead machine. By 10 a.m., 5 more groups had arrived. One woman said she felt nauseous as soon as she stepped within 20 feet of the wreck. Another claimed her drone refused to fly overhead. One group reported hearing distant tapping, metal on metal, from beneath the wash. Local authorities tried to intervene, cordoning off the area with yellow tape and vague warnings about safety and ongoing federal interest. But it was too late. The internet had already seen too much. The site had been exposed, and for the first time since 2003, the name Holloway wasn't just a mystery, it was a place. And that place was about to be remembered the way the desert never forgets, through fire, silence, and bones. It was, without question, Daniel Holloway's Jeep. Same make, same model. Same faded green paint clinging stubbornly to the sides like moss on a grave. The license plate, twisted but legible, matched the report. The vehicle was discovered half buried in a dry wash, nose angled downward, as if it had tried to burrow its way into the earth. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the burn. The Jeep was scorched from the inside out, not exploded, not torched in a wildfire, burned from within like something had ignited at the core beneath the seats and radiated upward. The exterior showed only minor heat distortion. The roof was intact. The tires, though deflated, hadn't melted. But inside, melted dashboard, charred steering wheel, seats reduced to brittle, blackened husks. The metal of the gear shift had warped like plastic. The passenger door was fused shut. And in the back seat, fused to what remained of the frame, was something even harder to explain, a small circular pattern melted into the floor, a spiral. Investigators, local and federal, were dispatched quietly. Hazmat suits, drones, 2 unmarked black SUVs parked a quarter-mile away. They moved fast, cordoned the site, silenced the live streams, but not before one photo leaked. A single, overexposed image showing the interior of the Jeep from a cracked window. 2 things were visible: a partially burned child's backpack and what looked like the corner of a leather-bound notebook, charred but intact, tucked just beneath the back seat. People asked the obvious, why hadn't this been found before? The search had covered this area, hadn't it? According to the original 2003 search grid, no. This section of the preserve had been listed as inaccessible terrain, steep drop-offs, no access roads, no air visibility due to rocky overhangs. It had been skipped. The desert hadn't hidden the Holloways. We just hadn't looked where it wanted us to. The crash site was unlike anything authorities had expected. It didn't look like a vehicle that had broken down. It looked like a vehicle that had been punished and buried, not by time or sand, but by intent, as if something wanted it left there, undiscovered, forgotten. Until now. They weren't buried, they were placed. Roughly 30 feet from the wreck, at the base of a dry slope, searchers found the remains. At first glance they appeared scattered, wind-worn, sun-bleached like so many fragments of wildlife. But as the dust cleared and the perimeter was established, a darker truth emerged. It was a circle, carefully arranged, not haphazard, not collapsed from natural causes. 1 adult, 1 child. The bones were aligned in opposing directions, heads toward the center, feet pointing out, like the arms of a crude compass. Surrounding them were stone markers, smooth river stones placed upright into the sand, forming a ring just beyond the reach of the skeletal remains. Inside the ring, carved shallowly into the desert floor, was a spiral, not drawn, not scratched. Carved, with something sharp and deliberate. It had been there for a long time, protected by the rocks and the natural windbreak of the wash. The spiral matched the one seen in Miguel's drone footage, the same shape in Ethan's drawing, the same pattern burned into the Jeep's floor. No scavenger marks, no signs of animal interference. The bones were clean. Dental records confirmed it first. The molars matched Daniel. And then the heartbreak. A growth plate from the smaller skeleton showed a fusion consistent with a 12-year-old boy, Ethan. But something didn't fit. If they'd died here together, why hadn't they been found during the initial search? Why the arrangement? Who placed them like this? More disturbingly, what were they placed for? The spiral was at the center of it all, a symbol repeated again and again, in the journal, in the Jeep, on the ground. It wasn't random. Some called it a ritual, others a marker. One forensic anthropologist noted the precision. It's not just symbolic, it's spatial. Like they were aligning themselves to something. To what? No one could say. But the circle stayed with people. Rangers refused to step into it. A drone lost signal when hovering directly overhead. And on the night the remains were recovered, a freak sandstorm tore through the site, erasing all but the rocks and that single, endless spiral. The Jeep had more to say. While cataloging the wreck, one investigator reached beneath the collapsed center console and felt something wedged tight, half melted into the floor mat. At first, they thought it was debris, a piece of metal or plastic warped by heat. But when they pulled it free, it was unmistakable. A Sony Handycam, circa early 2000s, black casing, manual flip screen, covered in dust, ash, and something that looked like melted plastic, but intact. The battery was swollen, corroded around the edges, dead, obviously, but the memory stick was there, protected, clicked in place as if waiting to be found. Back at the temporary field lab, techs worked in silence. They connected the camera to an external power source, bypassing the battery entirely. At first, nothing, just black screen. Then, flicker. A date appeared, July 20th, 2003. And then, the first frame, darkness, night vision flickering to life, green tones, the inside of a tent, fabric walls rustling in the wind. Daniel's voice, hoarse, panicked. "They're back. Ethan, don't let them in." The camera shifts violently, turning toward the zip tent door. Shadows pass by the outside, slow, deliberate, too tall, too smooth, no footsteps, just movement. A sudden hum, low, vibrating, like a tuning fork buried in the ground. The camera cuts, static, then another timestamp, a new clip. Daniel, sweaty, shaking, holding the camera in his own hands. "I found the door again." "It's open this time." He swallows hard. "There's no handle, just heat." Then a flash of something, too quick to catch. A frame-by-frame analysis would later show what looked like a wall of polished steel embedded in rock, and next to it, a figure, barely visible, watching. The final clip is shorter, just 18 seconds. Ethan clutching his sketchbook, whispering, "Tell Mom I miss her." Then, darkness. The footage ends. It's unclear how long the camera sat there, how it survived the heat, the fire, the years. But it did. And now, the world had something it never expected. Proof. Not just that Daniel and Ethan had made it further than anyone thought, but that something else had been out there with them. And it hadn't come from any map. There was one final file on the camcorder's memory card, untitled, no timestamp. It was buried deep in the metadata, unplayable by standard software. Forensics extracted it frame by frame. What they found wasn't long, just under 4 minutes, but it was enough to change everything. Night vision again. The grainy green hue instantly familiar. The shot is angled from the floor of the tent, tilted as if the camera had been dropped or deliberately placed low. The sound begins before the visuals settle. Whispers. Urgent. Close. "Daniel, they're outside the tent again." "Ethan, I hear them." The fabric of the tent pulses slightly with movement, like wind or breath, pressing from the outside. There are no footsteps, no voices, just the same low hum from the previous clip, now higher, sharper. A frequency that doesn't just sound, it cuts. One viewer described it later as like someone dragging a needle across your teeth. Daniel lifts the camera slightly, hands trembling. Through the slit in the tent flap, light leaks in. Not white, not yellow, but blue, cold and unnatural, shifting like water against skin. Ethan clutches his sketchbook to his chest, his voice barely audible. "They don't want us to leave." Then a change in sound. The hum stops, and for a second, only a second, everything is silent. And then comes the tone. Not a frequency, not a beep. A tone, rising, whistling, like a scream from inside your own skull. Daniel gasps. Ethan screams. The camera jerks violently. The frame blurs. There's movement, fabric tearing, something heavy falling, the camera tumbling into the dirt. For one final instant, a shape appears at the tent's opening. No face, no eyes. Just a smooth, tall silhouette, framed by unnatural light, and an endless night. And then the tape ends. No glitch, no fade out, just black. The footage was analyzed by audio experts, video engineers, even cognitive scientists. No one could explain the tone. It didn't match any known frequency used by consumer electronics. One researcher claimed it affected the autonomic nervous system, triggering unease, nausea, even vertigo. The file is now sealed, officially. Unofficially, it's copied, circulated in encrypted folders across fringe corners of the internet. But even without seeing it, most agree on one thing. Daniel and Ethan weren't alone out there, and whatever was with them didn't belong in the desert. For years, the spiral had been just that, a strange pattern showing up in the wrong places, on Ethan's drawing, beneath the bones, burned into the Jeep, carved into the sand. But after the drone footage went viral, something unexpected happened. A retired archaeologist reached out. Not a conspiracy theorist, not a UFO chaser, a real academic. Her name was Dr. Lena Hayashi, formerly of UCLA, now living quietly near Joshua Tree. She had seen that spiral before, etched into stone walls near Kelso Dunes, in a site long dismissed as incomplete. Petroglyphs, ancient, faint, uncatalogued. The spiral appeared alongside other desert symbols, stick figures, mountain lines, what looked like the sun with lines bursting outward. But the spiral was always separate, alone, carved deeper than the others, and always surrounded by what she called deliberate emptiness. In some cultures, spirals represent life, cycles, vision quests, but not these. These weren't meant to guide, Dr. Hayashi said. They were meant to warn. She shared scans of her field notes, never published, mostly ignored. One page included a translation passed down by Kemehuevi elders. Where the spiral ends, the earth is thin. Another phrase stood out, step beyond and you step without time. Dr. Hayashi revisited the petroglyph site. It had changed. A new spiral had appeared, carved shallowly, recent. The rock bore fresh tool marks, unweathered. Someone or something had been back. She took rubbings, noted that the pattern matched exactly the spiral recovered at the Holloway crash site. Same dimensions, same number of loops, 7. The number 7 appears again in Daniel's journal. 7 lights, 7 nights. 7 marks on the back of Ethan's sketchbook. Coincidence? Maybe. But when investigators laid the spiral symbols over GPS coordinates from Miguel's drone flight, something else emerged, a shape, a configuration. The spirals weren't random. They were mapping something, a presence, or a path. And whatever that spiral marked, it hadn't been dormant. It had been waiting. It was the spiral that led them to it. After Miguel's footage and the discovery of the Jeep, a small team was dispatched under the guise of environmental assessment. But what they really brought was a van equipped with ground-penetrating radar, high-frequency imaging used in both geology and classified military excavation. No press release, no briefings. Just a quiet morning, a gridded section of sand, and a black van parked with its engine running. They swept slowly, looping figure eights across the area. The screen pulsed back, mostly what they expected. Compacted sediment, dry bedrock, heat signatures from recent vehicle activity. But then the scanner caught something. A void. Roughly 12 feet underground. Rectangular. Man-made. The technician ran it twice. 3 times. No doubt. Under the sand, beneath the spiral, there was a sealed channel. Not a cave, not a mine, straight lines, angled corners, and at one end, something denser. A reinforced slab, 8 feet across, 2 feet thick. A hatch. Concrete. Initial assessments guessed Cold War origin. Materials used matched pre-70s, reinforced military composite. No identifying markings. No visible access point, just weight and depth, and no explanation. Within 24 hours, the site was sealed. Yellow tape replaced with fencing. Plainclothes personnel began working in rotating shifts, digging, measuring, logging soil composition. What they said publicly was vague. Historical preservation zone, safety hazard, unstable terrain. But those watching closely noticed something strange. The radar van never left. For weeks, it stayed parked just outside the new perimeter, antennas rotating slowly, always focused on that one point beneath the sand. A deep, silent channel, and somewhere under it, sealed in concrete and history, whatever Daniel Holloway had found. Later, a drone operator attempting a low pass over the area lost all signal at once. Not just to the drone, his phone, his car's GPS, even his watch stopped for 10 full minutes. It restarted the moment he left the perimeter. He didn't go back. None of them did. Because now it wasn't just a disappearance. It was a location. And someone or something was determined to keep it buried. It took months of digital forensics to stitch the puzzle together. Daniel's journal had gaps, pages water-damaged, others burned around the edges. The footage was incomplete, the GPS logs corrupted, overwritten by years of exposure and degradation. But when laid side by side, along with satellite telemetry, archived survey maps, and Cold War declassified test site documentation, a narrative began to emerge. Daniel hadn't just gotten lost. He'd found something. Not by accident, but by design. His journal referenced stray signals, radio bleed, and alignment zones, phrases not commonly used outside high-level military communications. He described dreamlike states after camping near specific rock formations. Both he and Ethan reportedly lost time. "Hours pass in minutes," one line read. "The sun doesn't track right out here." But the most revealing entry came just days before the disappearance. "The floor hums, like a heart buried under miles of stone," cross-referencing the GPS logs and satellite records with old Army Corps of Engineers blueprints from the 1960s. A chilling possibility surfaced. Daniel may have located a buried weapons test site, one that never officially existed. Back then, the military experimented with subterranean weaponry, controlled detonations, electromagnetic pulse fields, psychological testing zones, projects known by code names Black Echo, Project Radius, Whisper Grid. Most were classified, some were shut down without explanation. A few simply vanished from the record. The Mojave Preserve was an ideal location, remote, empty, and, most importantly, forgotten. Until Daniel came along. His notes described a hatch embedded in rock. No markings, just an unnatural warmth, even at night. He sketched coils, wires, a heavy steel wheel. And then, "There's something behind it. I can hear it breathe." Experts believe Daniel may have triggered a proximity sensor, or worse, entered. The burn pattern in the Jeep, the spirals, the frequency on the camcorder, they all pointed to exposure, whether chemical, psychological, or something no one was ready to name. One cryptic note, scribbled sideways along the edge of a torn page, read simply, "It was never a weapon. It was a door." What he meant, no one could say. But the implication was clear. Daniel hadn't gone looking for answers. He'd stumbled onto a question, and whatever answered back, it never left. The Mojave should cool down at night. But near the sealed perimeter, where the sand covers the buried hatch and the spiral once was, it didn't. Infrared cameras installed for security began detecting odd spikes, not constant, not predictable, just pulses, flashes of warmth beneath the surface, as if something were breathing, moving. First, they thought it was geothermal. But the readings didn't match known patterns. No consistent heat source, no subterranean fault lines, no tectonic activity. And the spikes weren't deep. They were close, within 2 to 3 feet of the surface. A ranger watching one of the monitors at 2:43 a.m. saw something that made him leave his post and never return. Frame by frame, he replayed the moment. A cluster of 5 heat spots, equidistant, shifting slowly in a circular pattern. Then, in perfect synchronicity, they vanished. Nothing had surfaced. Nothing had flown in or out. The heat was there, then gone. Motion detectors installed nearby triggered at irregular intervals, always followed by a low-frequency interference with their audio logs. No footsteps, no voices, just a distant static, like wind layered beneath something else, a pulse, a beat, a whisper. The animals left first. Desert foxes, coyotes, even the birds. Then came the silence. Visitors to the preserve began reporting nausea, ringing ears, disorientation. One camper said he saw lights crawling across the sand just after midnight. Another, a former geologist, claimed the soil near the site felt magnetized. His compass spun for over 2 minutes before settling on due south toward the buried hatch. Theories spiraled again. Some blamed radiation. Others believed a Cold War experiment was reactivating. A few whispered the unthinkable, that the site wasn't meant to be sealed forever, that something had waited. And now that it had been seen, it was shifting. Echoes in the sand. No voices, no shapes. Just the sense that something was pacing beneath you. And every time the wind picked up, it didn't carry dust. It carried vibration. Like a warning too deep to hear, but impossible to ignore. For years, the case had clung to speculation. Evidence came in fragments, footage, sketches, shadows. But then came the bones. The adult was confirmed quickly. The dental records matched. Hair follicles, preserved in charred fabric, confirmed it. Daniel Holloway. The child's skeleton took longer, smaller, fragile, some damage from exposure, but the molar roots were intact, and the mitochondrial DNA sequence came back with a 99.9% match to Daniel's maternal line. It was Ethan. Father and son, side by side, together in death. That much, at least, seemed simple. Until the report came back from the lab. Estimated time of death, mid to late 2007. Not 2003. 2007. 4 years after the search was called off. 4 years after the voicemail. 4 years they were supposedly dead in the desert. The implications were immediate and chilling. It meant Daniel and Ethan had survived, at least for a while. Long enough for the world to move on. Long enough for the forest of theories to overgrow the truth. And long enough for the desert to change them. The bones showed no signs of violence, no fractures, no trauma, just sudden, severe dehydration and internal organ failure, likely within hours of each other. Not from neglect, but from exposure. To what? No one could say. Trace minerals in the marrow suggested they'd been underground for extended periods, breathing stale, mineral-rich air. Ethan's smaller bones showed signs of stunted growth. His body had aged slower or differently. One pathologist offered a possibility. They weren't living underground. They were surviving. But why return to the surface after 4 years? What made them come back? And what happened to them once they did? The arrangement of the bones still made no sense. The spiral, the circle, the stillness. As if they weren't just placed, but prepared. Laid out not by chance, but by ritual. The question wasn't just how they survived. It was who or what had kept them alive, and why they were finally let go. It was almost missed. While investigators cataloged the Jeep for the final round of evidence extraction, one forensic tech was assigned to detail the vehicle's windows, looking for fingerprints, etchings, residue. On the passenger side window, obscured by layers of ash and hardened dust, something caught the light. Faint lines, scratches, not from nature, not from weather. These were deliberate. A message etched from the inside, likely with a key or a penknife or even a fingernail. They cleaned the glass slowly, carefully revealing the message. 7 words, carved unevenly, as if written in desperation or panic. We should never have opened it. No signature, no date, just those words hanging like a confession. The handwriting matched Daniel's journal. The message faced outward, toward the desert, as if someone inside the Jeep had wanted the words to be seen, not from within, but by whoever might come after. Investigators speculated it was written after the event, after whatever Daniel and Ethan had witnessed or experienced near the hatch. Perhaps even shortly before their final moments. The door, the hum, the exposure. It all pointed to something being released. But what it was remained unknown. A substance, a technology, a presence? Some said the message was metaphorical, a guilty man cracking under pressure. Others believed it was literal. They'd opened something, and it hadn't stayed closed. The message became infamous online, spread as a meme, printed on T-shirts, debated in late-night podcasts. But beneath the viral fascination was an unshakable truth. Someone at the edge of life wanted the world to know. They'd crossed a line, and the cost wasn't just survival. It was silence. On October 2, 2023, all activity at the Holloway site ceased. No press conference, no warning, just a sudden, coordinated sweep. The Department of the Interior, alongside unnamed federal contractors, declared the region geologically unstable and marked it as a high-risk exclusion zone. Signs were posted, satellite maps blurred, rangers were reassigned. Access denied. Drones flying over the area were geo-fenced, locked out via updated no-fly zone data, pushed quietly to every FAA-compliant UAV system. Those who tried anyway found their devices scrambled or forcibly landed by signal jamming. Then the takedowns began. Miguel Calderon's footage, removed under DMCA claims filed by a shell organization with no public-facing identity. The camcorder clips, gone. Forum threads, shadow banned, locked. Even archived screenshots of the spiral were hit with copyright flags. What hadn't been deleted was buried. Algorithms suddenly stopped recommending Holloway-related content. The phrase Mojave Spiral became unsearchable on multiple platforms, and users who reposted or archived too aggressively found their accounts suspended, throttled, or flagged for misinformation. Whistleblowers said nothing. Journalists stopped asking questions. Even Lucid Crimes, the YouTuber who'd revived the case, deleted his channel. No explanation, no final video, just gone. Whatever had been found, whatever Daniel had uncovered, had triggered something larger than anyone expected. And now, the same silence that swallowed him and Ethan was swallowing the story itself. The desert, once screaming with mystery, had gone quiet again. But not because the truth was solved, because it had been sealed. And this time, not even the wind seemed willing to talk. It was found in a weatherproof pouch tucked beneath the Jeep's warped rear seat, preserved between melted plastic and scorched fabric. Time had faded the edges, but the contents inside were almost untouched. Ethan's sketchbook, a dozen pages, mostly charcoal, some graphite, a few in colored pencil, smeared but still legible. The first drawings were innocent. Campfires, the Jeep, a mountain ridge, a desert hawk in flight. Then they changed. Spirals began to appear, first as background, then central, drawn into hillsides, carved into rock faces, floating above people's heads like halos or targets. Then came the shadows, tall, stretched figures, limbs too long, heads too smooth, no faces. In one drawing, Ethan had drawn himself, small, alone, his name written in block letters on the back of a jacket, standing in a place with no sky, just black lines sloping downward into a pit. And then the final page. It was different. Drawn in black ink, every inch filled. A tunnel, long, narrow, collapsing into a point of darkness. At the bottom of the tunnel, a small figure, Ethan, holding a flashlight. He was facing inward, toward the dark. And within that darkness, eyes. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, wide, expressionless, perfectly circular. Some big, some small, none human. The way he'd drawn them, they weren't peeking, they were waiting. The page had a single note, scrawled along the border in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. They see better when it's quiet. That page, more than any footage or forensic report, told the real story. Ethan had survived, had seen things, had drawn what others couldn't describe. And whatever had been in that tunnel, whatever lived beyond the hatch, it had looked back. The sketchbook was entered into evidence, but copies circulated, secretly, silently, passed among those who still believed the story wasn't over. Because you don't draw something that vivid unless it was real. And Ethan's last drawing wasn't just a memory. It was a warning. There are places the map doesn't explain, coordinates you can enter and still never arrive, roads you take that stop being roads and become silence. The Mojave is one of them. And whatever happened to Daniel and Ethan Holloway in that desert, whatever opened out there, was never supposed to be found. The case is closed now, at least officially. The site is restricted, the evidence sealed, the video's gone. But stories don't die just because no one talks about them. And the desert, it doesn't forget. It waits. Maybe Daniel was right when he wrote, "It was never a weapon. It was a door." Maybe he never meant for anyone to follow. But someone will. Because the footage is still out there, buried, mirrored, re-uploaded under new names. The drawings are in hidden folders. The spiral has reappeared, etched into concrete, scrawled on abandoned ranger stations, chalked onto the backs of signs, deep in the preserve. They say the air still hums at night. They say the lights are back. They say if you walk far enough, long enough, quietly enough, you'll find the hatch, still sealed, still waiting, and maybe, just maybe, something behind it is listening. So if you go, remember what Ethan wrote. They see better when it's quiet, because the desert doesn't give back what it takes. It keeps. And sometimes, when the world stops watching, it opens. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.